Welcome to Chapter 2 of Week 1 of Nursing 420 Leadership and Management. This short video is going to review a little bit about organizational designs. I'm going to try to add some pieces of information rather than reiterate what it is that the textbook says. So you will be responsible to make sure that you read the information in the textbook, which is going to help you to do the matching activity that will follow. So my suggestion is read the text, watch the short video, then go ahead and do the matching, save it to your computer, and then upload it into the Dropbox. So before there was classical organizational theory, which is the first one that's discussed in your textbook, in the early to mid 1800s, businesses primarily had 6 to 8 employees. They were generally family or family friends. Some examples of these types of businesses might have been the mercantile shop or the saddle shop or a blacksmith. There might have been a school or the school employees. So that was pretty much up until the time of about the 1890s. So classical theory really started about the late 1800s. Max Weber is the father of organizational theory. So he's the one who pretty much coined the classical organizational theory. Your book does talk about 4 different elements or components to classical theory, which I'm not going to go over here. You can certainly read those in the textbook. But when we're thinking about structure and flat organizations, tall organizations, some of the control of classical organizational theory, we think of some examples throughout history where classical organizational theory, very hierarchical, the boss was the boss, the employees were the employees, and nobody asked employee opinion. There's a couple really great examples. One is a book that I'm going to give you, and one is also a movie. There was a movie out probably in the early 90s that is called The Triangle Factory Fire. It is an excellent example of classical organizational theory about the early 1900s and a sweatshop, which was a sewing factory, called the Triangle Factory Fire. It's a true story and a very good example of classical organizational theory. Another really great example is the book by Upton Sinclair. If you're a reader, there is a book from 1901 called The Jungle, and it is about typical classical organizational theory and some of the deplorable conditions that happened in the Chicago meatpacking industry. There were no regulations. Employees had concerns about things, and their concerns were not listened to. And this book talks about rats that got chopped up and placed into the meat, and workers that would spit into the vats, and there was rotten meat that got packaged, and just some of the really deplorable conditions. In 1901, President Teddy Roosevelt, who really wanted to work on improving work conditions and trying to move away from the classical organizational theory, he really made some strides to change some policy and some of the politics in order to improve conditions. If we look at the next one of the theories, I have classical here on this slide, you can see. The next one is humanistic. Humanistic theory really started about the 1930s. It's also called neoclassical. And it really is when we started to look at the human relationships and movements in within working conditions. It really started to emphasize cooperation, worker participation. There was a human aspect in these companies. And so this is really when you started to see this happen. And again, this was about the 1930s. One of the key points, which your textbook does talk about, is the Hawthorne effect. And I'm not sure if you learned about this in your research class, but with humanistic theory, because people are being shown an interest in themselves as an employee, as a worker, people like that. And so humanistic theory really is instrumental in looking at how employees are being treated and getting some employee input. The next organizational design is that of systems theory. Your book also talks a little bit about systems theories. This is about the 1960s, and it's based on the work of von Bertalanffy. He says that organizations should be viewed as the whole structure: employees, products, input, outputs. You look at all the different mechanisms and all the different systems in places within the organization, and that in order for it to be effective and work properly, one system really depends on how the other systems or the other elements are interplaying. Contingency theory is another one. Contingency theory is really based on the premise that organizational performance is best when the structure matches the environment. So if we're looking at organizations being seen as these total systems, you want everything to work best together. The structure needs to be flexible, and it needs to vary based on what it is that are the needs of the organization. So my example here would be if you were designing an organization or two different organizations. One is a women's prison facility and one is a women's birthing center. You would design those organizations and structures very differently because of the nature and the intent of what it is that the organization does. So that's an example of contingency theory. Chaos theory is a newer theory of organizations, and it really is based on the mechanics of quantum physics. And it notes that organizations are in a constant state of flux. There is ever-changing atmospheres. You look at the total system and you see that the system needs to be very adaptive because the system is totally changing. Healthcare systems are a good example of something that runs on chaos theory. Then there's complexity theory. Complexity theory is probably one of the newest theories, and it really is based on a lot of the similar concepts as chaos theory. It really says that organizations aren't merely linear structures, but that they're very, very complex. Healthcare systems are again a good example of this because healthcare systems are riddled with randomness, ever-changing, new policies, staff, magnet designations, new policies and procedures that come down the pike. And so there's lots of things that cause us to have to change, sometimes pretty rapidly and sometimes even against our will. So we have classical, humanistic, systems, contingency, chaos, and complexity. Those are the examples that are discussed in your textbook, and a little bit of a background here. So what it is that you're going to do for one of your activities this week is you're going to go into the Blackboard, into this module, and I have an attachment there. It is a Word attachment, and it's a matching on the different organizational designs and an explanation or a case study related to them. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go through and you're going to match them up. Save this document to your computer, and then I have a Dropbox right within the module. You can re-upload this paper right into the Dropbox so that I get it. If there's any questions as you go along, please feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I look forward to you learning a little bit about organizational theory.